Welcome to the Tote the Note podcast hosted by Jim Rhoads, founder and head coach at the Octane Group. Join us while we dive into the questions that matter most to buy here, pay here operators in the world of subprime auto finance. This episode is brought to you by our friends at NEO. And now, here's your host, Jim Rhoads.
Hey friends, thanks for tuning in to the Tote the Note podcast. I am thrilled to have with us in studio here in Clearwater this time. We're doing it right in the same building, same room. And so I'm glad to have Bill Elizondo with NIADA join us. And we're going to talk about leasing today.
Wow. Hey, well, thank you very much. And I didn't think you were going to stop that music. I was ready to start getting up and dancing. So that was great.
That's fun stuff, yeah. And that's Michelle's voice, as you know, that's in there. So everybody knows Michelle now from the morning show and of course, Facebook. But yeah, so we're fortunate to have Bill Elizondo. For those of you who don't know Bill, I've known Bill for some time. We met before you were with NIADA. And at that time, I think you were with AFS Software. Mm-hmm. And then you spent a time before that with Superior Auto, right? Mm-hmm. And that was a couple of years, I think. And then you had a long stint with America's Car Mart. Tell us about that.
It's a great opportunity. I was the vice president of operations when I decided to go to Superior. And I was before that director of collection practices and review for the company. So nice. Yeah, it was a good, nice 8 years. I got I really cut my teeth into the buy here, pay here business, being in that particular case, a dealer,
right?
Because, you know, we did everything, right? So there was not anything we didn't do. So it was wonderful.
And then you had a long stint with Car Financial.
I did. That was some great years. You know, the greatest part about being at Car Financial is I still see most of these guys around.
Oh,
you know,
sure.
I happened to see 2 or 3 of the guys just recently at one of the current conventions that just happened just the other day. Mm-hmm. It's great to catch up with them, but most of us who have been through and been around Car Financial, you understand so much of the business that you can do so many different things. You're versatile in so many ways that people still stay in this business because we all love it.
Sure. Oh yeah. So I know Chris Tiller. We've talked about. I know Chris over there. And Chris was with us on a prior Tote the Note episode. And so that's a one I would encourage our listeners to go find as well.
I would as well. I thought it was fantastic. Yeah. I think both Chris and Brent did a fantastic job. Yeah. Of course you did a great job.
Thank you. Yeah, I showed up. But yeah, that was a rich subject. And so I definitely think people would enjoy hearing that. And Car Financial, of course, has been around a long time. And Chris in particular has a lot of experience in that space. So they know this deep subprime space quite well. So I know that you have a good deal of experience with leasing, obviously in your work as a moderator. You work with dealers who also do Lease Here Pay Here.
Yes.
Right. And so I knew you would be a person who could really add a lot to this conversation. I have a cursory experience with it on pieces. And then I was in pretty deep with a dealership in Tennessee that did leasing. And so learned a lot of the accounting parts of that, and of course, we set up sales process to help negotiate and navigate some of the parts that would come up. And we'll get around to talking about those. But I think, it might help to give a little background on the leasing thing. Like when we think about Lease Here, Pay Here, and I really want us to focus today, and we'll go slowly through this because some of this stuff is kind of is going to be new to some of our listeners, and it's a little complex parts of it, right? But if we think about it in the context of, your typical lease transaction, I personally have leased vehicles. Back when I was a salesperson, sales manager in the middle 90s, we were selling leasing on new cars, and you would have some resistance back then. There was still some carryover from years ago when they used to do some open-ended leases, and a lot of people got in some really uncomfortable places, probably only on new cars back then. But there was still some kind of a carryover from that back then. Now that's improved, but there's still a bit of discomfort, as you know, within our consumer base, is that the customer sometimes feels like they want to own the car, and they say, "You're going to lease it to me as like a rental." And no, I want to own it. They feel like they want to own the car. And so we have to navigate that.
Absolutely. It's a little bit of a selling point and a discussion, but, with the benefits of why you do leasing and what the benefits are to the consumer themselves. Once you explain those to them, in a lot of cases, they're going to see the value there. What do most of our customers want to do? They want to turn the car back in after 2 years, or they turn it back in after 1 year, and they have that availability a lot more in a Lease Here Pay Here, especially today.
Right.
The opportunities in today's market, considering the price of the cars and the expense and the term that you have to put them on, In a lease, you can put them on, 24 months, 36 months, and still get them that same car that you were trying to get them before. The back end of the residual is going to be the only thing that's going to be the difference. And again, it's an explanation. And I think that, if you do a good enough job in any situation, whether it's buy here, pay here, lease here, pay here, and you talk with them enough and you explain to them what exactly is happening, and there's no hidden agenda, so to speak, at that point in time, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. So I want to make sure before we move away from it that the clients that you work with, are they primarily doing what I would call a lease to own? I mean, does customer always give an opportunity to buy the thing at the end, or how's that work?
Yes. In most of and all the lease here pay here's that I work with and or that are part of some of the even 20 groups that we have. The biggest thing that they have and the availability that they have is that they're going to offer an opportunity for the customer to be able to buy the car after they finish the lease part of after they finish the lease.
Okay.
So at that point in time, they have the residual, they just buy it out. And in a lot of cases, some dealers don't charge any finance charge and they allow them to kind of, run with it and just let them pay it out, because at that point in time, it's a benefit to them that they're actually, the customer's going to be able to own that vehicle at that point.
So again, let's go slowly on this part, because I don't want to assume that some of our listeners understand this piece about, especially you already mentioned the word residual. And I think we want to take it slow, where take me, for example, back when I used to lease cars as a consumer, and I've done it even still recently, it can make sense, but it's like, there are things to understand about that. So first of all, the way I would describe it to someone, because sometimes friends would ask me, why do you lease? And I basically say, look, the way I feel about it, we all pay for our depreciation in one form or another, right? It's a question of how we choose to pay for it, because the car is going to depreciate and somebody's got to pay for that. It's usually going to be me, the consumer, right? So now I got to figure out, okay, so I'm going to finance this thing for 3 years or lease it for 3 years.
Right.
And the thing I enjoyed about that, as much as anything, I would explain to people, well, it gives me a walk away option. Right. If my circumstances change and I no longer need the vehicle or want the vehicle at the end of 3 years because I leased a pickup truck and now I want a minivan, whatever, then I can just simply walk away. And the lessor or the lease company that provided the funding on that, they're the ones that are taking the risk on its value at that time.
Right. That's correct.
It's really true of our lease here, pay here people too. They're kind of predicting a future value. In their case, they're mostly using around 20%. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So it's not quite the same as a calculation would be on a new Toyota 4Runner, where they're going to do some really specific calculations and they're come up with a 53% residual or whatever the number is.
Right.
In our case, it's a little more regimented on a used car.
Sure.
It's kind of specific. And really, let's talk about the motivations then. If you're a dealer, then what is your real motivation for choosing to go leasing for your customer? Let's talk about the kind of the positives for the dealer first. How would you benefit?
Oh my goodness. You have the availability of the vehicle coming back to you at a point in time. And before we get to that, I want to kind of get back to something you just said. And I don't want to miss this one, because most of our customers, and you made this comment, they have the chance to kind of get out of it. Anybody in the buy here, pay here business knows that after 2 years, in normal cases, everybody wants to get out to it. And in fact, that's, Car Financial, when I first started with them, we would never buy any contract or any note over 24 months for a reason. Yeah. We knew that, that was about the time period that was going to be beneficial, and anything longer was just, it was not going to pay out.
Sure.
So, in a lease, you have that capability and that ability to be able to, after 2 years, get out of it if that's what you really want to do at that point in time. There's sometimes a fee for that, to the consumer, but, or to the lessee, but, and that's one thing, you got to remember terminology. And, that's going to be another thing we're probably going to be talking about in just a few minutes. But, so now getting to your question, what is the benefits to the dealer at this point? Well, first of all, I can get my car back. So at that point in time, I have the availability of getting this vehicle back after 2 or 3 years that the person leases it. And either I can do a few different things. I can release it again, depending on the value. I can wholesale it, or I can just go ahead and just retail and just sell it outright to somebody at that point in time. So those 3 things are a true benefit. You have the tax advantage, and that's another big thing that I think we're going to probably talk about it in just a few minutes as well, and kind of discuss that a little bit more. But you also have the availability on a lease. It's still your vehicle. So, therein lies the opportunity for you as the lessor to be able to go and get that vehicle if the individual is not paying as agreed.
Right.
And in some states where, you have a right to cure law, and I'm not saying every state, and I'm not an attorney, nor do I play one on TV.
Right.
But in normal cases, you have that capability to be able to go and get that car without having to wait that 20 days and then another 15 days after that, and do it that way. So those are the capabilities that you have as far as, that's another positive. Bankruptcies. You're not included in bankruptcies because, again, you're the lessor, you're the person that you own the vehicle. Your name is still on that title.
Right.
So, that gives a big advantages for you at that point in time.
Yeah. So those are pieces certainly that would be significant. I think if I'm looking at it from the dealer's perspective, and I told you, I kind of want to give an example. And so our listeners might want to jot down some numbers here, because as we talk about these numbers, this will kind of, I don't want to get too technical. Like, we probably would have to do a whole separate episode with some CPAs present to help us really break down.
Hold on, that's not correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's just there's some complex math here.
Right. No,
around,
absolutely. Yeah.
Some of these things. And so I think the part that I wanted to touch on was this idea that when a customer, well, first of all, let's quickly dispense of the idea that when we are leasing, if we're doing lease here, pay here, we don't need an RFC. Right. Because of the way we're taxed. And so we can talk about that part, but a lease company, generally speaking, they only experience or realize income as they collect from the consumer.
Correct.
So that alleviates the thing about, the markup and getting taxed on the markup like we do in a retail installment contract. So that's one piece. And then I think the other part is if the example I wanted to give, I have a $20,000 selling price on a car, or in this case, we don't need to get into all the complex terminology about that, but basically it's a selling price. And so now you got $1,000 down from that customer on a $20,000 price. You've got a $450 a month payment was kind of what I picked. And then we said 20% residual. So I picked $4,000 as a residual amount. So with those numbers, I think the first thing that happens for a dealer is they've got the car sitting on the lot that's inventory, just like the retail dealer does. Now the customer comes in and agrees to lease the thing on, let's pick a 24-month lease. Okay. They put $1,000 down. Well, the difference for that dealer versus a retail dealer is if I'm leasing, I only have to remit sales tax on the down payment that I received from the customer, right?
Right.
Whereas in a retail installment contract, my sales tax would be calculated on the selling price of the car. So that means if I got $1,000 down from the customer on a $20,000 price, depending on where my sales tax is in my area, then the dealer, the retail dealer or retail installment contract dealer is going to have to cough up in typically about 30 days, right? You're going to have a paper tag and they're going to have to go to the DMV and pay the sales tax. So that's a big chunk of the $1,000 that comes from the consumer that goes directly to the DMV, doesn't get to stay in the dealer's pocket for risk. So the dealers immediately got that much risk in the contract versus, the lease situation.
And there's 31 pay-as-you-go states.
Okay.
So, and that's a huge benefit. Now there's going to be different things in some of the other states.
I see. Okay.
But for the most part, you have 31 that are pay as you go.
Okay.
So, that's a true benefit in a lot of different ways to a lot of people who don't have that. State of Texas is a little bit different. They have some different, but even in the state of Texas, there's some huge benefits that they have. When you buy the car, you pay taxes on it once, and you don't have to pay the taxes on it again, whether you get it back, you resell it, or you wholesale it or anything else.
Okay.
So there's some other benefits that Texas has that other states don't have.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that I mentioned that is because Texas is a pay-as-you-go state. I mean, you can do that on a retail store. Yeah.
Right. So that's uncommon. Like, I'm not aware of other states besides Texas that do that. So just for our listeners that aren't familiar, in Texas, they have the good fortune, the dealers do, to be able to remit sales tax as they collect from the customer instead of having to cough it up front in that scenario that I described a minute ago. So obviously it makes it very advantageous for dealers in the state of Texas, and it offsets a little bit some of the benefit of the sales tax and benefit of going the lease route, for example. But now let's move into the customers made their down payment. We've addressed the sales tax piece. We understand that we've got a big check we have to write to the DMV if we're doing a retail installment contract. But now as we move forward into let's talk about what it looks like when the customer makes their first payment. And it's $450 payment. Let's say it's a month out. Well, let's kind of break down what the difference looks like for the dealer now. So the dealer still hasn't, the lease dealer still hasn't reported a lot of income. They collected the down payment,
Right.
that's income. And now they collect another $450. So there's a small amount of that that's
Sure.
reported now as income, right?
Mhm.
And so let's compare that now to the retail dealer. The retail dealer has already experienced a markup. I think the example I gave was, let's suppose this $20,000 car, they paid $13,000 for it. That means they experienced $7,000 in gross profit on the sale, just simple numbers, not factoring in, recon or whatever. But they got $7,000 of gross profit there, which means they're going to be taxed on that. Now, at some point they would discount the note if they have an RFC, but this is why we have an RFC, because they're going to be experiencing $7,000 of gross profit.
Sure.
They've not yet collected any of that gross profit. They're negative from a cash perspective, even after the first payment. And so they're actually, going to be negative on cash, but they've also got this income tax obligation associated with this gross profit.
Yep.
Whereas the lease dealer, they've just barely seen a really small amount of income, right, from having collected that.
Mhm.
And so let's talk about quickly, and I don't mean to get too deep into accounting, but basically in the lease situation, as I understand it and remember it, the dealer who's leasing has this asset on their lot, this inventory on their lot. And now when they lease, the customer pays the down payment. And so on the balance sheet, though, that continues to be an inventory type of asset. It's not on the property anymore, but it's the value of the car is the remaining asset. Am I right?
That should be correct. Yes.
Okay.
Right now, there's some other strengths that you have, and we can kind of go into it, but and that would get a little bit deeper, but there's 100% depreciation that you have even at this point in time that you can still take on,
Okay.
the assets yourself,
Mhm.
in a lease.
Mhm.
Whereas that'll start to change in the next few years, but even at this point in time, it's still a benefit for you to be doing leasing. But that's another different subject at that point in time. And I mean, like you said, I think that we can kind of go into a lot of different things. At this point.
There are complexities here, and I'll just restate that neither Bill or myself, we're not attorneys and we're not CPAs, so we're not trying to give legal advice here. We're not giving any kind of financial advice,
Nope.
especially around any accounting. But we're just trying to help dealers understand if they're new to this and they're trying to understand the concept. Because my frustration, what prompted me to reach out to you and have this conversation in this way, is that my frustration around social media and some of the things we see shared out there is a lot of people talking about leasing and of course, like a lot of things, whether it's golf clubs or whatever, it's like, you should have this kind, this is the only kind to have. And, some will say you should only do leasing. I'll only do leasing. And so others say, I'll always do a retail installment contract. Well, it's not a one size fits all. It's
Right.
kind of everybody's different situation, what their business strategy is. It can vary with that. But the other part that frustrates me is I feel like people who talk about leasing or try to promote leasing don't tell the whole story.
Right.
Like there are certainly advantages around leasing,
Sure.
and we understand there can be advantages for the consumer, there can be advantages for the dealer. So there are a lot of advantages, but I think it because we work with dealers, especially who are new to the business, right? We do a lot of work with launch dealers who are getting in it, and we obviously have an obligation to share with them the total picture before they step into that.
Right.
And so we're accustomed to kind of introducing them to all those things. So I think that's the important thing is, to me, the balance sheet is very, very different. Instead of where the retail installment contract dealer, 30 days in, they collect the first payment, they've got, a $19,000 note, on their receivables still. So the inventory is not part of their assets anymore. It's not on their balance sheet.
Right.
The car's not, but now it's replaced with this large note. Whereas the lease dealer doesn't have the notes, they have the car really is the asset. So that takes me into this thing about the liability. If you're a lease dealer and you have 200 cars out on lease, then that means you have some liability associated with those assets that are out there driving around in the county.
Sure.
Am I right?
Well, you have some liability as far as just like you're in a buy here, pay here. I mean, if you're thinking that you have liability of them doing something and that it's going to come back to you, no.
Okay.
They don't have that liability. So the Graves Amendment, and I can't remember exactly when it was enacted, but I almost can remember it being 2005 would be the date that just sticks in my head.
Okay.
But that, and it's gone up in court a couple of different times.
Okay.
It relieves you, the lessor, from the liability. And so it stays on the leasee at that point in time for anything that they do incorrectly, or whether it's anything at any point in time. It could be a bad wreck, it could be a manslaughter, whatever.
Sure.
At that point. So that the liability is the same liability that you would have if you had a vehicle out there on the street right now and they didn't have insurance.
Okay.
And that same is that's what you're talking about.
That
correct?
is, that's the part that
Sure.
I had understood, that there was still, because I remember dealers shopping for insurance since 2005. And I thought there was suggestion that the insurance was higher for dealers who are leasing. So I don't know what that is.
I can't say that. I honestly, I cannot speak to that directly.
Yeah.
But that's, I mean, I can, just like anything else, I can gather the information and let you know, but I have not heard that it's actually larger.
I think we can just urge our listeners to investigate that part for themselves, and let's let them figure that out. But be aware that could be a thing to address with your insurance company. Maybe ask the question sooner than later, and make them aware that you are going to be doing leasing. So you touched on the repo part. Let's talk about that. In the case of a repo, you're saying in some states, the repo rules are more favorable for leasing.
Sure. Well, you're not, so since you're not included in a bankruptcy at that point in time, you have the availability to go and pick up that car, because again, you're the lessor. So you're not going to be included in the bankruptcy at that point. Okay. The repossessions are still about the same. So you don't want to repossess just off the cuff. It's going to be for a good reason. But for all practical purposes, you give them the same kind of time frame. And again, I speak directly for even Missouri, who's got a right to cure law. And I just started a new customer that is, and a 20 group member that he does specifically Lease Here Pay Here. And the reason he started to do it is because he doesn't have to wait like a Buy Here Pay Here for those 20 days. And then an additional, I think it's 15 days after that for right to cure to send the first letter and then send the second letter. And then you can cure it. And then you can go and pick it up if they're still in default at that point in time.
Gotcha. And then the bankruptcy piece. So have you had much experience with that part? I really know very little about that part.
Yeah, no, the bankruptcy, there's, you're not included in the bankruptcy. Okay. So that's not part of because again, you are the owner of that. You still have the titles in your name. Okay. So you can go and get that. Plus it makes it easier. So, it gets impounded at some point in time, something happens to it. You can go and get that vehicle from the impound a lot easier at that point in time. You don't have to have all the other paperwork that you normally have to have in a Buy Here, Pay Here side of it.
That's a good point.
Yeah. You turn that vehicle over. Now, in some states where you allow the customer to go and, get their tags and title, and sometimes they don't. Yeah. You still have that same capability at that point in time, but that's not what you're looking for. In the lease, that is every time, each time that you have, you do a lease at that point as well.
So I want to go back to the bankruptcy thing just for a minute, because I really hadn't thought about that piece, where I do remember with the group that I was with in Tennessee for a time, that you said you can't be included, but I remember a lot of times the customer didn't know that, the customer's attorney didn't know that. They would try to include it. Yeah. Right. And so you had to be on standby to quickly notify them that, no, that car doesn't belong in the bankruptcy, right?
That's right. Yeah. I'm still the owner of that vehicle.
Right.
I've just leased it out. Here's the leasing agreement, and so on. And yes, that is correct.
Yeah. And I think for our new listeners out there, it's like that whole concept around just the impound thing to me is something I hadn't contemplated, but you're right. The fact that car's titled in my name, I can show up and reclaim that in a much different way. Right. And so, as opposed to, having to go through the documentation or the hoops of being a lien holder and may or may not be past due, whatever. It's my car. Sure. Like if I'm the lessor, right? Yeah. Very good. So yeah, I think there's, we covered a lot of those. I think the other things that come to mind for me when I think about leasing that doesn't get talked about enough is like you're going to have fewer options in software. Right. There are just fewer providers out there, a DMS, that are going to provide a solution. And we don't have to list them, but I know there are probably good 5 or 6.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So,
that are the main players in our market. There's probably a few others that, but these are the ones that, hey, I see them at the trade shows, they're always involved in the dealers associations and the NIADA as well.
Sure. Yeah. And I can say that you're going to want a good accountant, because not every accountant out there is going to be familiar with lease accounting. It's a bit of a trick. Like I got to tell you, I can do related finance company accounting and, the dealership relationship. I can do that stuff frontwards and backwards. I probably had one accounting class in college. I had to get in there and learn it. The leasing thing, that was more challenging for me to learn. And I would say I still don't. With the years I spent with them, there's still parts of that are fuzzy. And, so that's uncomfortable to me. Like if I'm a dealer, I really need to understand what's happening in my financials. And so I think that's a thing to know, is that, there may be a pretty steep learning curve with lease accounting so
Sure.
that you really understand what's happening in your business.
Mhm.
In some ways it's simpler. There's the car, here's the payments. In some ways that's simpler. But I would just say that it's important for us to know, how the accounting works, which means getting a really good CPA who can handle that.
Oh yeah. And it's how funny you should be asking that, or talking about that right now. I just talked to somebody about that today. And the conversation was, and what I expressed and is that even in some accounting firms, there's people that are going to know the
Right.
lease here, pay here, and buy here, pay here space, and there's others that are not. And it is what it is. But I said get specifically these people. So there's certain names of individuals that you should be doing business with that understand the lease here, pay here side of this business, and just like you should understand. They know the buy here, pay here side of this business.
Right.
And there's others that don't. I mean, sometimes your local, CPA, great friend, been a friend for 30, 40 years, fantastic. But not knowing this side of the business is going to be a detriment to you.
Right.
Yeah.
So a couple of things we can finish up here. I want to talk a little bit more about the residual before we kind of move into the exit piece of leasing and the, the secondary market part. But when I think about the residual, let me kind of explain it. Let me say it in a way that I would say it to a consumer, and then
Sure.
you can correct me if any part of this is mistaken. Like if I were presenting a lease to a customer, I would say, so how's this going to work? You're going to basically, the nice thing for you is, in traditional financing, you would be financing 100% of the car and you'd be paying interest on 100% of the amount that you paid for the car. In the case of the lease, we're going to lease it to you for 24 months. So you're going to have a smaller payment because in a way you're only paying for a portion of the car, and you're going to decide later if you want the other portion of the car. So right now you're just deciding to use this portion. You're going to pay for that. And now you're going to reach this residual, which quickly, I got to say, one of the nice things from a sales strategy standpoint is if I know the customer's got to come see me in 24 months to resolve this, I get to have a conversation with my customer at a time that the car still got some value.
Right.
Customers losing interest in the car. It's a good opportunity for me to trade them into something else. Right.
Right.
And so that's one of the real positives I think that doesn't get talked about enough is from a pure sales standpoint. It's nice that you have that sort of forced conversation at the 24-month mark. In this example, it's like you have a conversation with the customer and say, what do you want to do? Do you want to continue to lease it? Do you like it? You want to keep the payment the same and keep leasing? I understood that was one of the options.
Yes.
You could turn the car in, right, without penalty. If you have damages, you'd pay for the damages.
Right.
But otherwise, that's a simple part of that. It's like, that's why there's that residual. You pay this part now, and depending on what your needs are at the end of that, we can either get you into a different car with lower miles, right? Or we can, talk about keeping that car. So the customer's got options.
Right. Absolutely.
In a very different way.
Yes.
Than they would have in the case of the retail installment contract.
Absolutely. I will say, and one of the things about the guest, once you get them in that vehicle at that point in time, that individual will have a lot of opportunities to, you're right, do these different things. Now, in some cases, and in some leases that they have, there's sometimes they have almost like a buyout. That they have to pay a certain amount of money to get out of the agreement or the lease at that point in time, because it's not an agreement, it's a lease. So, so we haven't talked about the negatives, and I really want to be able to speak to some of the negatives as well. So, when we're ready to do that, I want to make sure that, because look, there's a lot of positives, and, at the end of the day, you're going to have to weigh what's best for you and for the business that you're trying to do, because in a lot of ways a lease can be negatives as well. You don't have ownership in it. And so there's a lot of people out there that you do business with right now that they want to be able to own that vehicle. They want to say, I want my name on that title, not yours.
Right.
So that's one of the potential negatives, but there's also the negative of, if you have some guests that want to go and they don't understand all the terminology, if you're not explaining it to them correctly and they don't understand that this is truly just a lease and it's going to be a real big negative. But then the positive of going back to the other side is, if as long as you do all those things, it can be a positive for you in that respect as well.
Have you had any dealers doing either or, like on the same car? Will they give the customer the choice?
Well, I've had some that have tried, but it gets confusing.
That sounds tricky.
So especially with our guests that go into a specific type of, or to go into our dealerships at that point in time, and I say their dealerships at that point in time.
Yeah.
I still think I'm a car dealer.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But go into their dealerships and go and talk to them. If the terminology is not, if it's confusing to the guest at that point in time, it's going to be confusing down the road. And then all of a sudden they're going to say, I didn't sign. I wasn't aware that I was doing a lease. And then there's a lot more issues at that point.
Right.
So,
yeah. So with that dealership in Tennessee, we were very, very careful to fully disclose early on.
Right.
This is all we do here is leasing. And so be aware, and it's not a negative. You just need to understand it. And so, yeah, there's a way to overcome.
Sure.
So I think the training part of that is, there's some things to overcome, but it can be with good training and good phrasing, we can help the customer get comfortable with that idea, because you're really not trying to take advantage. In fact, one quick thing I would touch on again is that, if I had both inventory, like let's say I had a $20,000 car and it was leasing, and I had a $20,000 car over here that was retail installment contract, you could almost say to the customer, look, I'm happy to help you, with this lease deal at your $1,000 down. It means a lot more because we don't have to take as much of that out as for sales tax.
right.
And so your $1,000 actually represents a larger commitment, in a way, on this particular deal. So I could help you with the retail installment contract, but we might need more down payment. So understand, part of the reason that we like to offer leasing is because it helps me to help you on down payment. I can let you in the car without as much. If I'm doing only retail installment contract, I might have to be expecting more down payment to make it all work.
Sure.
And so it's just a way to approach it and help overcome that. I don't know if you had any other negatives. The things I was going to move into as kind of the exit part was kind of the secondary market when it comes to selling paper.
Right, sure.
If you think about exiting the business or value of your business, it's problematic. In fact, I heard a story not long ago, somebody I knew who was in the business in Texas. They had a pretty large lease portfolio. The principal passed away, and they really just couldn't find a home for where to go sell the paper.
Right.
And so they basically made a decision to run it off, which was not their first choice. They would have preferred to just liquidate the paper.
Mm-hmm.
But that particular scenario is one that can come up just because there aren't as many buyers for that kind of paper.
That is correct. That I think that's been the biggest negative in the space right now. There's so many positives for leasing.
Mm-hmm.
And just like anything else, as a nonprofit, we don't sell anything. We're just trying to give you information and insight.
Sure.
So I get people asking me that all the time, Bill, what's the biggest negative that's out there?
Right.
I said, it's money.
Yeah.
I said, there's not enough people that are lending for it.
Sure.
And there's not enough that'll buy it if it goes bad.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of those two as the biggest negatives, then, and you can get past those, then you're okay.
Yeah.
But for back to your point, is there's not a lot of people that can buy or would buy those receivables at that point in time, or those leases. But there's more that are getting into it.
Yeah.
I can tell you that there's 2 or 3 different finance companies and or banks and or institutions, financial institutions that are truly looking into getting into it. In fact, I just got a call from somebody just the other day asking me that exact same question. Been traveling a little bit, so I haven't had a chance to get back with them, but they're a very large entity that wants to understand more about what are the strengths and the pitfalls, that I can see from my standpoint.
Right.
Because I'm directly involved in a lot of them, and being in the 20 groups and having a Lease Here Pay Here 20 group, that is a big part of the opportunity for us to be able to discuss a lot of these things, positives and negatives at that point as well.
I should have explained to our listeners that, we generally try to keep these conversations down to 30, 45 minutes, but I knew that with this particular subject, we were going to need to, expand on some parts of this. And I hope what we shared has been useful to some of the folks. We'll wrap up here shortly, but folks have been hanging in there for a bit. But
I got to go for a swim.
Yeah, right. You got to get out of here. But no, I think the part that we want to make sure to introduce is that, when I think about it, if I'm a lender and you were in that capacity with Car Financial for a long time, if I'm a lender, I can see why, because we just replayed the whole thing. It's like, I can see why the down payment, the residual piece is a positive for the dealer. If I'm a dealer and I'm going to finance this customer and I'm going to keep them in my portfolio, I'm going to trade them into another car in 2 years or 3 years or whatever that period looks like, then I can see the value for them. When I'm a lender and I'm going to loan against that paper and I run the risk of a default, I don't want to be in a place to have to deal with those residuals. How am I going to deal with that? I don't have the same benefit that you're going to have as a dealer. Right. And so I've always kind of recognized that would be problematic for me if I were going to be a lender or buying the paper. It's like, I don't enjoy the same benefit at that lease, when that lease balance comes due or that residual balance comes due, I don't enjoy the same benefit that the dealer does.
Sure.
So it's just kind of problematic in that way for me. And I think it's just an important part that doesn't get talked about enough. And I think, it's important for people who are contemplating this as a business model to look at all that. All Bill and I tried to do here today was to introduce people to the high points and low points, maybe of both sides, and be aware before they step into that, kind of what the options are and kind of what the opportunities are.
Sure.
But certainly we have to include, potential downside. So to me, because Michelle and I work a lot with people who are getting in the business, and even from the very early stages, we ask them, think about what an exit looks like.
Right.
Think about what the value of your business is going to be down the line, even from the very first days of your business. So now, all these things come into play. It's like, how could I liquidate if something happened to me or one of my key people? What's that going to mean for me? And so that's why we always kind of, people get in the business and they expect to be in it for 20 years, but we also know life is life. Sometimes circumstances change. And if we find ourselves unexpectedly having to liquidate this primary asset in our business, can we sell it?
Right.
Right.
And there are people that they are out there.
Yeah.
And there's, again, like I said, there's more and more that are coming around.
Mm-hmm.
I look at it, and you and I have been in the business for a long time. A long time ago, there were not a lot of finance companies or banks that were getting into the buy here, pay here business.
Sure.
They didn't even want to get into the buy. They're like, no, I don't want to touch that.
Yeah.
In fact, that's why even Wells Fargo at one point in time sold off Car Financial because, the explanation that I got a long time ago was, if you can't really, offer Wells Fargo always wanted to offer 7 different products,
Mm-hmm.
One way or another to their customers. But in the bigger scheme of things, they didn't see us as that value because our customers weren't able, or our guests at that point in time,
Mm-hmm.
I learned guests from somebody recently, and I'm trying to use it even more because I think it's a great value to be able to call them a guest versus a customer.
That's good.
But I will say that, since they couldn't, they said, you're not in our model of what we're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
So, they didn't do that. They didn't want to get into it. And now look at everybody that says, I'd love to be in the buy here, pay here business. And there's so many even private equity firms that want to get into the buy here, pay here business for a number of reasons. Yeah.
And I would say that I've always said that basically I would never describe buy here, pay here as recession proof, but I do treat it as, or think of it as recession resistant.
Yes.
Because, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that when crazy things happen with the stock market, crazy things happen with the economy, buy here, pay here's down here, just chugging along because folks got to have those cars.
That's
right?
it.
And so that's kind of the bottom line. So I think it is attractive for investment. We've seen investment and capital kind of come in and out of this space, but it does make sense to me at a time when the economy's tough that buy here, pay here is a smart place to invest.
Oh, absolutely. And Lease Here Pay Here is even, just as smart. Again, right now, maybe not as many lenders, but there's more getting into the market. And if there's more, and just like anything else, if all of a sudden there's going to be more people in the market, guess what? You're going to have more people following them saying, you know what, maybe I should get into that as well. Right. So, sure. I see that as a true value at that point. And again, from the leasing standpoint, it's almost a no-brainer. This is why in the most recent months, I've had more new car franchises probably contacting me, talking to me about it and discussing, saying, how do I get into this? What should I do? And, what are the opportunities for me as a new car franchise?
Sure.
And from that standpoint, not to speak, about anybody else, but from that standpoint, they get vehicles already from their trade-ins. It's almost a perfect scenario to kind of walk right through and put it into some type of deal like that.
Sure. Good. Well, we know there's opportunity there. Did we leave out anything that you wanted to share?
I think we talked about some of the negatives. We talked about, terminology. You got to make sure that you're using the right terminology on the lease versus, buy here, pay here. The other thing that we didn't mention.
Thanks for joining us. Please leave a review and don't forget to subscribe to Tote the Note. And thanks again to our sponsor, NEO. Find them at neoverify.com. Until next time.
When you're doing the agreement, because there's no actual interest rate that you're It's an implicit interest rate that you're going to be putting onto it, but there's no interest rate that is actually listed on the actual agreement or the lease itself. So that's actually a true big benefit that we didn't really touch on, but some value to that, because, you know, if you're comparing yourself or someone's comparing your price to somebody else, well, that's a big thing as well. So, you know, just like anything else, you know, that's a strength to, you know, a lessor at that point in time as well. But I think that's pretty much it. You know, it's buy here, pay here, and lease here, pay here are very similar in so many ways, other than the terminology. But you're still collecting on it the same way. You have the availability to turn that. You know, if you can turn that vehicle around after something happens to it, customer turns it back in, there's some repossession, whatever. You can turn it back around in 5 to 7 days.
Sure. Nice.
Depending on the recon. So
it's a big benefit.
It is.
Yeah. There's certainly some key benefits that we want our listeners to be aware of. I think that, you know, one of the things we didn't touch on, and it's okay, like that we there's cover it all, but there's this idea that, you know, with used car prices getting higher, there's some argument that that's a good time to have that on your balance sheet, you know, more so than maybe before. So, you know, I don't want to try to predict what's going to happen with the used car market, but I can see why some people might be looking at leasing at this time, you know, because of the cost of the car. And now we factor in the the sales tax piece on the front end, and you start to see why it makes sense with the higher cost of car. But anyway, we should probably wrap it up there. I know you and I could talk about this for a good long while. By the way, Bill, as I said, is a 20 group moderator with NIADA. If you're contemplating a 20 group, reach out to Bill at NIADA, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Reach out to him at NIADA.com. And let's and ask him about availability in 20 groups.
Sure.
Great place to be in a peer group and have a chance to learn from others who have been there and done that and can kind of be mentors for you. So we definitely love the 20 group thing. And so we know Bill's a good guy to have as your moderator. And we know NIADA is a good place to be with that. I got to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, NEO. If you folks are enjoying the content here with the Tote the Note podcast, then just let's thank NEO, because it's their sponsorship that helps us bring a lot of this to you. So by all means, let's give a shout out to NEO for adding their support to what we do. So again, let's wrap up there. But Bill, again, I thank you for joining us, and you folks reach out to Bill at NIADA.com.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks for joining us. Please leave a review and don't forget to subscribe to Tote the Note. And thanks again to our sponsor, NEO. Find them at neoverify.com. Until next time.